Hey guys, it's your boy 14 Fluffies here today with another episode of Card Wars. And today we are featuring two of this game's most potent anti-meta floodgate style boss monsters. Today we have Evilswarm Ophion versus Master Hero Darklaw. Obviously I love to play heroes. Heroes are my thing. Darklaw's that man and he's incredible. But on the other side of the coin, I also really like to play Evilswarm. It's a deck I'm trying to build in real life, and really the two decks play very similar. You just sit on one boss monster and a bunch of back row, and you just prevent your opponent from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So it kind of made me think that these cards are very similar, but they do very different things. But which is better in this current format, though? So I am attempting to answer that in this video. So let's start off with discussing Ophion. Historically, Ophion has always been a powerful card. I mean, this card came out in 2013, and it was an absolute force to be reckoned with in the Dragon Ruler format. Just because it completely shut down Dragon Rulers just by itself. The only way this card was easily outed was with Blaster in hand. You'd pitch Blaster and another fire monster to pop it, basically. So, which is a bit situational, but you know. It's one, and it's also just one out to Ophion, and if they didn't have that one out, you're pretty much just set to win right there. So, yeah, obviously, that was the best format for Evilswarm, but now that it's 2016, Evilswarm have gotten a little bit more support since then, and because of the increased support for, just random generics, not generic, just regular normal monster support. Obviously, Evilswarm gained a little bit of consistency with things like Unexpected Die and Painful Decision, stuff like that. So, but enough about how the deck itself functions. Let's talk about Ophion. And for all you guys who don't know what Ophion is, which there shouldn't be very many of you, by the way, Ophion pretty much reads while this card has Exceed Material, level 5 or higher monsters cannot be special summoned, which is why I pretty much shut down all Dragon Rulers. But in today's meta, the number one deck that this card stops is Cosmo, just because of the fact that your opponent cannot summon ships at all. And not to mention they also can't summon stuff like Dark Lady now, since she's level 6. But getting more into it, another thing that Ophion has that has always been incredibly relevant is the fact that it nets advantage for the Evilswarm player, as well as searching out its own protection in the form of Infestation Infection. So, yes, that's another reason why Ophion's such a pain to deal with, just because of the fact that you cannot try to destroy it with spell traps, because they always have Infection for it. So, yeah, and not to mention, Infection is pretty much just a field-wide equivalent of Forbidden Lance for all Evilswarm monsters. So, yeah. Another thing that Ophion has is that it has a really nice body in the form of 2550, which is bigger than most other anti-meta boss monsters like Darklaw and other things like that. So he's pretty beefy, not super beefy, but he has a respectable size attached to him. And another thing that's really relevant in this format is the fact that he cannot be tributed for kaijus, just because of his effect that level 5 or higher monsters cannot be special summoned. Because while this card has ski materials, your opponent cannot tribute cards to special summon kaijus, because the kaiju cannot be summoned. Because summoning the kaiju is a special summon, and tributing an opponent's monster is cost. I'm not exactly sure about the ruling, but I'm 99.9% sure that Ophion cannot be tributed for a kaiju. So yeah. And because of that, it's incredibly hard to out in this format, since obviously you can't kill it with spell and traps. You can't tribute it for stuff like kaijus and stuff. So really, the best way to actually out Ophion is like within a rank 4 XC play, like Castel 101, stuff like that. But really, that's a large commitment now in this game, unless you have Instant Fusion to back it up. But yeah, but all that but that just is more of a testament to how good Ophion was. But yeah. But the problem with Ophion is it's largely ineffective against the current meta, except Cosmo, and Mermail. But realistically, this deck struggles with Monarchs, Burning Abyss, and Phantom Knights, just because of the fact that they could just play around Ophion's Floodgate effect anyway. And, yeah, and not to mention, Ophion loses out to Solemns, because Ophion is an XC summon and is inherent, so Solemn Strike just completely stops this card from even hitting the field, which is really bad for the Evilswarm player. Even if they have Kirkion, they're still set behind a turn for their Ophion. So that means that they're very vulnerable to losing at that point, or just being put so far behind that they can't come back. But other than that, though, if your Ophion hits the field successfully, you're pretty much set to win, unless they you're pretty much set to win for the most part. I mean, obviously luck and RNG is a factor in any game, so anything can happen. But yeah, Ophion is still a really strong card, and I'm just going to end it at that. So let's move on to Master Hero Darklaw. You guys know that I know pretty much everything there is about this card. I mean, considering how it's a one-sided macrocosmos that effectively snipes cards out of people's hand whenever they attempt to try and search or thin their deck, yeah, he pretty much shuts down everything in the meta except Cosmo for the most part. And with the way Cosmo are being built now, like Fire King Cosmo and even like Post Bosch with Tin Can, like Darklaw puts in a little bit more work in the matchup, but he's still pretty bad against them just because of the fact Cosmo Town exists. And because of the fact that they can just banish their pilots for Dark Destroyer, pop Darklaw, and then just continue with their plays. It doesn't really matter. Another thing that's very important to know about Darklaw is that it can be summoned with Mass Change, and Mass Change second reads in the text that it is counted as being summoned by Mass Change, which means that Darklaw is more splashable than Ophion, because if you play any Dark decks, you can run Mass Change second and have access to Darklaw. And another thing is that Darklaw Summon is not inherent, which means that it dodges things like Solemn Strike and pretty much anything that's like inherent summon negation. So yeah, which is very nice. And it only requires one monster on field to summon, so I mean you have to obviously Mass Change the monster. I mean whether or not using Mass Change 2 is a different thing just because you have to discard for cost. But yeah, that's irrelevant because you only really need to have one monster on the field that's a lower level than level 6 to summon Darklaw. And lastly, the effect to banish a card from your opponent's hand is very exploitable. If you know what you're doing, really. I mean, hero players play Dark Bribe. I've seen some players play like 1 day a piece in the main deck just to make their opponent draw so they can snipe cards as well as being able to thin their deck as well. Obviously, Dark Bribe's excellent just because you can negate spells or traps. I've seen Grand Horn in heroes, so yeah. Anything that makes your opponent draw against their will, you can pretty much just trigger Darklaw. So yeah, and not to mention like Max C is also like a huge double-edged sword against Darklaw. Like if you activate Mass Change and they chain Max C, you're gonna get a card out of their hand. It's the ultimate neg 1 Max C. So yeah. Sorry about the camera. But let's talk about the downsides of Darklaw. Compared to Ophion, Darklaw cannot protect itself by itself. It has no way of netting advantage to the player, and really it's easier to out because it has a smaller body compared to Ophion. And yeah, I mean, whereas a card like Ophion could be special summoned from the graveyard back with a card like XC Reborn or even Call the Haunted. XC Reborn's better because XC Reborn attaches itself as material so that you can have that Ophion lock. Darklaw has no way of actually recurring himself from the graveyard just because of the fact that, well, he can only be special summoned by Mass Change and cannot be special summoned by other ways. Come on, camera, focus. Thank you. But yeah. Another thing is that he doesn't net the opponent any advantage. I mean, Ophion searches cards like Pandemic and Infection, which are very useful cards. But Darklaw really only makes your opponent go minus, and which you know you can't get everything that you want in one monster, but I mean you can't really ask for much more. I mean, Darklaw is still really good, but yeah, that will conclude Darklaw. Each has their own flaws. Darklaw is easier to out, Ophion's harder to out. Darklaw has a much more powerful effect in this meta. Ophion is slightly less relevant, but against certain matchups, Ophion can auto-win, whereas Darklaw is easier to play around. And, you know, you can, as long as you don't commit to onto the field, Darklaw is pretty easy to play around. Obviously, if you, and you can set the cards that you absolutely need to have in your hand as far as spell and traps are concerned into your back row, and then attempt to thin your deck so they don't get hit by Darklaw's effect. But yeah, but as far as which one's better this format, I'm probably going to have to say Darklaw just because of the fact that Macro is such a good card and it's one-sided, and not to mention since searching is so prevalent this format, Darklaw pretty much stops that as well. So I'm inclined to say that Darklaw is the better of these two cards. So tell me what you guys think in the comments section. I'm pretty torn about this because I love both of these cards and I love playing both decks. So yeah. I've ultimately chosen Darklaw, so tell me what you guys think yet again, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next video.